time to set those winning lineups for week 9 of the fantasy football season. SI Senior Fantasy Analyst Michael Fabiano joins us to help us do just that. All right, Fabs, who are we firing up at the quarterback position this weekend?
First off, quarterback is a dumpster fire this week. We've got second and third string quarterbacks all over the place. With 4 teams on a bye, pickings are very slim. We'll start off, though, with Dak Prescott, who's had 2 straight games with over 20 fantasy points. He's looked really good, and he's got a great matchup this week. Huge game for our beloved Dallas Cowboys, Jen, against the Philadelphia Eagles. Their defense has been awful against quarterbacks, allowing 19-plus points 4 times to the position, including 31 to Sam Howell just last week. So I'm starting Dak Prescott, and I like Derek Carr this week against the Bears. I mean, he's been relatively productive. He's not putting up like these bananas numbers, but still, listen to this matchup against the Chicago Bears. They have allowed 18-plus points to 6 quarterbacks this year, including 5 who've gone over 22. So I think Derek Carr is a nice option if you need a replacement at quarterback.
And if we are able to sit a quarterback on, I mean, you're right, the landscape, it's so tough right now. If we can sit a quarterback, who should we sit?
This is going to sound crazy to you, but Sam Howell is my sit of the week. He's also my QB 12. That's how bad it is.
Right.
You're probably going to have to start Sam Howell, but the matchup's not good this week against the New England Patriots. They've been very tough on quarterbacks, especially at home. They've held some really good quarterbacks to minimal totals. Tua Tagovailoa, Jalen Hurts are on that list. So I guess beware Sam Howell. And then you could probably sit Geno Smith. I remember that guy last year who was the QB5, and I still couldn't believe he was Geno Smith. Now he's Geno Smith again. The numbers have not been great. He's really only had 1 or 2 good games from a fantasy perspective. Bad matchup across the country against Baltimore. I am sitting Geno.
The running back landscape also is a little bit tricky, and that's evidenced by 2 of your starts this week, one of which is in a committee. The other one just hasn't looked good, but you say go ahead and start Rachaad White and Zach Moss.
Rachaad White's actually been better the last couple of weeks, giving you mid-double-digit fantasy points because he's being utilized as a pass catcher. If it's going to be this way the rest of the season and he's had 13 targets the last 2 weeks, then heck yeah, fire him up in PPR leagues. And the matchup's really good against the Houston Texans. Rachaad White is an RB2 this week. And you mentioned Zach Moss. We kind of been waiting for this whole thing in Indianapolis to go in Jonathan Taylor's direction. It hasn't. Zach Moss continues to play enough snaps and get enough touches to be a viable fantasy starter. And he's got Carolina this week. Their defense has given up 15-plus points to 6 different running backs. So it goes without saying that you're starting Jonathan Taylor, but I like Moss this week too.
Alexander Mattison is on your sit list, and I'm curious as to whether this has to do with the Vikings offense in general or another running back on the team or what your reasons are. So give it to me.
It's a little bit of both. This week, Jaron Hall is going to be the starting quarterback for the Vikings. Have you guys heard of him? Maybe not, because he's a rookie, which means that, this is going to be a matchup where Atlanta can kind of stop the run with a little bit of ease. Let's put it that way, because I don't think Hall is going to beat them through the air. And Madison also is losing touches to Cam Akers. The matchup's not great against Atlanta. So beware Alexander Mattison. Same thing goes for Dameon Pierce. Hey, I liked him last week. I thought he had a good matchup against the Panthers. He did not make up for that great matchup with fantasy points. In fact, he scored 4.6. Had a couple of chances in the red zone, could not cash it in. This week, he's got a matchup against the Bucs. Second fewest fantasy points allowed to running back since week 5. Unfortunately, Dameon Pierce has regressed from a fantasy perspective in his second NFL season.
All right, let's move over to the wide receiver position. Who you got in your starting lineups this weekend?
I love Garrett Wilson. And his ceiling took a hit without Aaron Rodgers. He's still putting up decent numbers, right? 17 or more points in 2 straight games. He's got the Lightning Bolts this week on Monday Night Football. They have really struggled against perimeter receivers. So even though Zach Wilson's no great shakes, Garrett Wilson's still putting up some pretty decent totals. And I also like Terry McLaurin this week. You may look at this matchup and think, well, wait a minute, this is against the Patriots. It's a bad matchup. Well, actually, their defense really isn't what it used to be against wide receivers. They've allowed 10-plus points 11 times to wide receivers, including 5 who've gone over 17. Terry McLaurin's a hot player right now. I'm going to stick with him despite the matchup that may not look great on paper, but it's actually not that bad.
You're sitting 2 wide receivers that are arguably 2 of the top wide receivers in the NFL, but I'm guessing this has to do with their quarterbacks.
I stuck with DJ Moore last week, and it didn't work out against the Chargers. Even though it was a negative game script for Chicago, all the targets went to Cole Kmet. This week, you've got the Saints. Not a great matchup. They've allowed the third fewest fantasy points to perimeter receivers. And once again, no Justin Fields. It's going to be the Tyson Bagent. So that's just not a good matchup. And it's not a good quarterback situation. And neither is the situation in Arizona. It looks like, at least right now, Clayton Tune is going to start. Now, it could be Kyler Murray. We'll figure that out later in the week. But right now, it looks like it's Clayton Tune. And if it's Clayton Tune, he's playing the wrong tune for me in terms of starting Marquise Brown. And I know he's been very good. This is also a bad matchup. Cleveland has been really tough against perimeter receivers on their home field. So if you have depth and Clayton Tune starts for the Cardinals, Hollywood Brown probably should be best on your bench.
Moving over to the tight end position, I absolutely love it when this happens, Fabiano, but two of your starts this week were actually in our waiver wire column last week. So maybe they're even still available now. If you're not in a super deep league, give them to us.
If I'm in a league where Dalton Kincaid is still available, I should probably find a better league. I got to be honest with you right now. He's had 2 huge games in a row. Last week, he had 17.5 points. He's got the Bengals this week. They've allowed the second most fantasy points at tight ends. I have Dalton Kincaid in my top 5 at tight end. That's how much I love him without Dawson Knox in the mix. And I'm going to go with Taysom Hill, too. Listen, 3 weeks in a row, double-digit points. They're using him as a pass catcher. They're using him on RPOs as a runner. They're using him at quarterback. Heck, they're using him everywhere. So Taysom Hill at a really thin position against a bad Bears defense, I will roll the dice, throw that dart, and start Taysom Hill if I need tight end help.
Okay, I'm really interested in your sit tight ends because, as we know, it's always tricky to start tight end no matter what. And you just said that Bagent targeted Kmet more than anybody else, yet you have him on your sit list, which means there's probably a lot of tight ends that you like starting this week. And so give it to me. I'm so excited. Why are we sitting Kmet?
Kmet is still in my top 15 at tight end.
Okay.
There are just options that I like better at the position. And the Saints defense, they've allowed an average of fewer than 9 points per game to tight ends this year. So listen, if you have to start Cole Kmet, I get it. He's a low-end option, and that's really it. And he's been really inconsistent. So having a good week doesn't necessarily mean he's going to have another. And then Tyler Higbee, who is like living on this sit-em list at tight end. Last week, he actually wasn't terrible. He had around 9 points, but that's kind of his ceiling right now. He's got the Packers this week. They've allowed double-digit points to just one tight end all season long. And Matthew Stafford is hurt, which means we could see Brett Rippon at quarterback for the Rams. Keep tabs on the status of Stafford throughout the week. And honestly, keep tabs on the status of a lot of these quarterbacks. Because as I mentioned at the top, there are a lot of second and third string quarterbacks who might be starting this week. And it is not a good situation from a fantasy perspective. That's why I have Sam Howell as a sit-em and my QB12. I get it. It's confusing. Trust me, I'm a little bit confused when it comes to the quarterbacks this week as well.
Yeah, especially with 4 teams on bye, with quarterbacks that you probably would have started, because let's face it, Russ Wilson has been startable. Brock Purdy's been startable. Jared Goff has been more than startable, and most people are still starting Trevor Lawrence. So it is a very thin pool of quarterbacks this week, but hey, we got you to give us the best advice, and that's all we need to win our matchups. Come get all of Michael Fabiano's advice, start sits for every position, including defense, and yes, even kicker at si.com/fantasy.